Hi, everybody. I'm Howard Reel, the host of the Real Truth Radio Show. A couple days ago, I was learning with my rabbi, and we were talking about the concept of Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name. And of course, it's every Jew's, every human being's job to defend God's honor and prevent Chilul Hashem, prevent the desecration of God's name. And that's a problem this Shabbos, this week, because we're learning the Parsha of Ki Savo, which includes the Tochacha, the admonition, God telling the Jewish people through Moses what will happen to them in the centuries to come if they go away from Torah, all the terrible things that will happen. Here's a little bit of what's in the Tochacha. I'm quoting. But it shall come to pass, if you will not hearken unto the voice of the Lord your God, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day, that all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. The Lord shall send upon you cursing, vexation, and rebuke in all that you settest your hand unto for to do, until you be destroyed and until you perish quickly, because of the wickedness of your doings, whereby you have forsaken me. And your carcass will be like meat unto all the fowls of the air and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away. And you shall grope at noonday as the blind gropeth in darkness, and you shall not prosper in your ways. And you shall be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save you. You shall beget sons and daughters, but you will not enjoy them, for they will go into captivity. Therefore shall you serve your enemies, which the Lord shall send against you, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And you shall put a yoke of iron upon your neck, until he will have destroyed you. And you shall be left few in number, whereas you are as the stars of heaven for multitude, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. Now, these words are familiar to us for a couple of reasons. First of all, we read the Tochacha twice every year because it's located two places in the Torah. It should also sound familiar because we are a post-Holocaust generation, and everything I just described and more in the full Tochacha happened during the Holocaust. When you're a religious Jew, very often people will come to you and say the classic question, how could God permit the Holocaust to happen? Well, I once heard a rabbi here in town answer that question. He answered it beautifully. He answered very simply, God did not permit the Holocaust. God caused the Holocaust. Now, in his book, A Divine Madness by Rabbi Avigdor Miller, he talks about this subject, talks about the Holocaust. The subtext of his book, the subtitle is Rabbi Avigdor Miller's Defense of Hashem, Defense of God in the Matter of the Holocaust. So Rabbi Miller talks about the Holocaust as the defense of God. He says the Holocaust was the Tochacha, which is referred to, which I just read to you from the Torah. It was the result, Rabbi Miller and others have written, of the unprecedented assimilation of Jews throughout Europe. Not just assimilation, but their hatred of Torah, their hatred of religiosity, which was prevalent among European Jewry. Here's what Rabbi Miller writes. Some think of the old country as a haven of pious and religious Jews, all wearing long black coats with hats and beards. However, this was an incomplete picture. In the decades before the war, the nation in its majority had simply slid away from Torah into assimilation and enlightenment, quote unquote. Rabbi Miller seeks to impress upon us the historical truth that in the pre-Holocaust century, a disdainful abandonment of Torah was rampant. For a century and a half preceding the Holocaust, new liberal movements essentially declared Torah observance optional. It began in the late 18th century in Berlin, from where it spread all over the Jewish nation. So many Jews defected from Torah observance that today we are left with only a remnant. The Torah world had suffered unspeakably, such that the unbroken chain that started at Sinai was weakened to the point of near destruction. Every sage of the era lamented it. The revered Chafetz Chaim, who lived and wrote in the decades before the Holocaust, explicitly warned of the impending wrath of heaven. So Rabbi Miller writes what follows as well. 100 years ago, they still kept the Torah superficially, but they began despising Torah leaders. Finally, the generations deteriorated, and now, just before World War II, the situation was out of hand. The Jewish world was tumbling downhill, and it was going to perdition. They were now enemies of the Torah. And therefore, since they declared war on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, He declared war on them. That's the story. And don't believe anybody, no matter who he is, if he tells you differently. I was there and I witnessed it with my eyes. I can speak on this subject at length. He continues, now we come to a very great problem, and that's the problem of lies. There have been so many lies manufactured about the Jews of Europe. The Jews of Europe, in the great majority, had cast away the Torah. Don't listen to what anybody tells you. I was there and I saw it. Now, too, the time had come to break the stranglehold by which the enemies of Torah controlled Jewish life so thoroughly. The 150 years since Moses Mendelssohn's time had wrought havoc upon the Jewish masses. Very many despised Judaism and were poisoned by the hatred that could not be overcome by persuasion. Rabbi Miller finishes with this. He says, the Torah says, also every illness and every plague that is not written in the book of this Torah, God will bring them upon you until you are destroyed and you'll be left few in number. That's from this week's portion, from the Torah. All misfortunes and catastrophes that have ever befallen our nation are here foretold. This establishes a principle. Every form of adversity is God's retribution for disobedience. And therefore, all adversity must be utilized as a reminder. Thus, there's no question that the destruction of European Jewry by the Germans is included in the prophecy in this verse, and that it resulted from the defection of many from their loyalty to Hashem. To say that we do not understand the ways of Hashem in reference to the European catastrophe is actually a contradiction to the principles enunciated in this verse. And it's an echo of the materialistic, atheistic attitude of the unthinking masses. The failure to understand that the European catastrophe was foretold in the Torah has generated animosity against Hashem and has lent to many a support for atheism, concealed or open. It's important for us, Jew and non-Jew alike, important for us to avoid Chilul Hashem, avoid at every chance we get the desecration of God's name. Today, unfortunately, we see anti-Torah sentiment rife in the state of Israel. In America, we see intermarriage rates of anywhere from 50 to 75%, depending on whose numbers you use. We know that 9 out of 10 Jews today are not religious. So let's get this lesson, and let's firm it up in our minds. When someone asks, how could God permit the Holocaust? And we answer, that's unknowable. Nobody can know the answer to that question. We are committing a Chilul Hashem. We're desecrating God's name. We're turning God into some cruel, mysterious, destructive monster who lashed out abominably for no reason. And that is a Chilul Hashem. We know the reason because God tells us in this week's portion. And so let me finish by quoting William Shakespeare. By paraphrasing William Shakespeare, the fault lies not in our God, but in ourselves. Be well.